Donald Trump has upended the world order, and it's not clear what will take its place. In the inaugural Vantage Point essay from Australia Institute Press, Dr. Emma Shortis examines the future of our alliance with the United States, which all too often makes us less safe and not more. You can order your copy of After America, Australia and the New World Order now, or you can become a foundation subscriber to Vantage Point and save 25% on an annual subscription. Find it at australiainstitute.org.au/store or via the link in the show notes.
Hi. This week on the show, we spoke to Matt Duss, Executive Vice President of the Centre for International Policy based in Washington, D.C. We recorded the episode on Wednesday morning, the 28th of May, Australian time. It's now Thursday, and since then, a few things have happened. They include a federal court ruling that Trump can't impose sweeping tariffs, Elon Musk being off-boarded, and Marco Rubio announcing that the administration would begin revoking the visas of Chinese students. Who knows what will happen by Tuesday when you first listen to this. I hope you enjoy the show.
After America is made on the lands of the Kure Wurrung, Ngunnawal and Ngambri peoples. We acknowledge that they and their ancestors have cared for the lands, rivers and sea, and all living creatures for thousands of generations. We pay our respects to elders past and present and acknowledge that sovereignty was never ceded.
We are in a battle for the soul of America.
This is a fraud on the American public.
Hi, I'm Emma Shortis, and this is After America. President Donald Trump has his eyes on the sky. And no, he's not looking directly into an eclipse, as best we know. Encouraged by his far right-hand man, Elon Musk, Trump is both remaking the American space program in his image and further militarising space, something he started during his first term when he created Space Force.
Space. Going to be a lot of things happening in space.
And we will pursue our manifest destiny into the stars, launching American astronauts to plant the stars and stripes on the planet Mars. This design for the Golden Dome will integrate with our existing defense capabilities and should be fully operational before the end of my term. So we'll have it done in about 3 years. Once fully constructed, the Golden Dome will be capable of intercepting missiles even if they are launched from other sides of the world and even if they are launched from space.
Not to be outdone, Trump's Aussie mates are hoping we'll jump on the space bandwagon too. Former Prime Minister Scott Morrison has suggested that the AUKUS deal isn't big enough.
Well, space is increasingly part of what we must now do in defence. That's been true for some time.
Alongside the Pillar 1 submarines and the Pillar 2 technology cooperation, he reckons we need a third pillar, in space. That would mean deeper enmeshment with Trump's America, an America that he is dragging further down an authoritarian rabbit hole. As we've discussed many times on the show, that matters to Americans and it matters to us. To talk more about what Trump is doing in this world and beyond it, this week we're really pleased to welcome back friend of the show, Matt Duss. Matt is the Executive Vice President of the Centre for International Policy, a think tank based in Washington, D.C. Before joining CIP, Matt was a visiting scholar in the American Statecraft Program at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. From 2017 to 2022, he was Foreign Policy Advisor to Senator Bernie Sanders. Matt and I discussed growing international condemnation of Israel and Trump's refusal to act, ongoing negotiations with Iran, the Trump administration's provocative approach to China, and his new Golden Space Project. Here's Matt now. Matt, welcome back to the show.
Very glad to be here. Thank you, Emma.
It's our pleasure. Hey, it's been a while, really, since we last spoke.
Nothing has happened. Nothing has happened whatsoever. Everything has just been on a glide path to goodness. I'm well. I'm okay. I'm hanging in there. How are you?
Yeah, about the same.
Okay.
Everything's too much.
Yeah.
Luckily for us, I think, we are pretty far away from everything. What's the vibe like there in the middle of things in DC?
Oh man, that's a good question. I mean, it is. I kind of say this. I may have said this last time on when I was with you. Is it's a challenge to distinguish the signal from the noise. I mean, there is so much noise. I mean, Donald Trump is very, very good at maxing out everyone's bandwidth with all kinds of crazy stuff. And, all his messages on Truth Social, like his beautiful and endearing and heartfelt Memorial Day message yesterday, which if people haven't read, they should probably just avoid reading. Yeah. But then there are things that really matter. And a lot of this stuff really does matter, that's quite troubling. So it's trying to distinguish, what of this, matters, given that we all have limited time and attention, and where should we really be focused. And also, I will say, like, what are things that Trump is doing that are not all bad? And there are some things that he is doing that I think are worth looking at and worth potentially supporting. I mean, one of those things is, his attempt to deal with Iran's nuclear program through negotiations. I've actually been pleasantly surprised. Now, this is not, we aren't nearing the, kind of the goal line here yet, but I do think we've seen more, involved and propitious diplomacy from this administration, frankly, and unfortunately, than we saw from the previous one. So there has been a weirdly, I won't say weirdly because he has said this all along, but he has shown an interest in, negotiations and talks, even if the way he goes about these talks, particularly in the case of Russia and Ukraine, are, weird and kind of all over the place and probably ineffective. But I do think, from where I'm coming from, it's like, I don't think it's right to just reflexively oppose everything Trump does. I do want to encourage more of a lean in to diplomacy and negotiation whenever possible. So,
yeah, absolutely. And that is something that we spoke about last time. And I think I'd like to come back to that and to Iran especially. But I did want to ask, I guess, and stay in the Middle East and ask you particularly about something that really does matter, which is Gaza, which is on the brink of deliberate starvation. Yeah. There was a lot of noise from the Oval Office about Gaza, especially at the beginning of the Trump administration, but he seems to, at least from the outside, have gone quiet on this issue. What's going on there?
Yeah, I think when we last spoke, it was right just a day or two after Trump announced his, Gaza plan, which was essentially the forced expulsion of Gaza's residents and the building of a wonderful new Trump resort.
The U.S. will take over the Gaza Strip, and we will do a job with it, too. We'll own it. We have an opportunity to do something that could be phenomenal. And I don't want to be cute. I don't want to be a wise guy, but the Riviera of the Middle East, this could be something that could be so bad. This could be so magnificent.
And while he hasn't talked too much about that, occasionally he'll make reference to it. I think the Israeli side of that has unfortunately gone forward, perhaps not as aggressively as some had feared, but it is still very much going forward. I mean, Netanyahu continually refers to the Trump plan. Just this week, we had the kind of the launch of this new Gaza, so-called Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, which is a complete scam. I mean, it was this kind of new aid delivery mechanism that was so, just so clearly not an aid delivery mechanism, but a mechanism for targeted denial of aid in order to move the population around and corral them to smaller areas in preparation for, eventual expulsion. I mean, it became so obvious that the person who was chosen to lead it resigned, I believe yesterday or the day before yesterday. But it does seem that, some of the world, particularly Western Europe, is slowly waking up to what has been patently obvious to all of us or most of us for 19 months, literally since the first days of this war, when multiple Israeli officials publicly stated and have continued to publicly state what their goal was. And their goal was the suffering of Gaza's people.
On Gaza, the humanitarian situation in Gaza is unacceptable. For 2 months now, no humanitarian supplies have entered Gaza. Aid must reach civilians in need immediately, and the blockade on Gaza needs to be lifted now.
We've seen the UK and other countries in Europe announce that they are going to be looking at, terms of trade agreements with Israel as a result of these clear violations. We finally had, Ursula von der Leyen wake up and realize, that Israel is violating the same sets of laws and norms that she has rightly condemned Russia for repeatedly violating in Ukraine. And yet it has taken her some 19 months to discover that this is being done by Israel, which she has stood in lockstep support of. So this is good. It is long overdue, shamefully overdue. But the question is, well, what are you going to do about it? It's all fine and good to announce that you are examining the terms of a trade agreement, but unless and until they're ready to impose actual consequences, it's just a bunch of talk.
I mean, the landscape does seem to be changing quite rapidly, for all of those reasons. You mentioned in Australia the language of the government is changing as well, which is a big deal for Australia to be out of step with the US. It sounds though that you don't really think that this is having an impact, and particularly, when it comes to the Trump administration, that it doesn't really matter what traditional allies are doing or saying.
Yeah, I mean, there's two things about that. One is, yes, I mean, words are fine. I would have loved to see these words. They were justified in November of 2023. But still, it does matter that, some of these leaders, like the leaders of Australia and elsewhere that I mentioned, are finally saying what has been clear for a very long time. I don't want to completely dismiss that. But ultimately, what will change, as I said, what will potentially change Israel's behavior is actual consequences. And as far as Trump, it's interesting because he had this trip a couple of weeks ago to the Middle East. He did not go to Israel, which is, again, part of his magic as kind of leader of the Republican Party, which he has put under his complete control. Like, imagine a Democratic leader going to the Middle East and just skipping Israel. It would have been all they had to talk about for the entire trip. But he went, and, there had been some leaked reports of how he was getting annoyed with Netanyahu, and he clearly, the talks with Iran that are ongoing are certainly not something Netanyahu supports. The agreement with the Houthis, where the Houthis agreed to stop shooting missiles at American ships. But as for Israel, I don't know, maybe we'll keep shooting at Israel. That was not an agreement, of course, that the government of Israel was very excited about. So Trump has shown, a willingness to just kind of do his own thing, as you would expect the United States to do. It's fine to do our own thing. I hope we do these things in consultation with others. But as yet, even though he has kind of signaled and leaked annoyance with Netanyahu, just as Biden did, we haven't really seen, again, any real consequences. And I think what I'm waiting for is, at what point does Donald Trump, or will there come a point when he really starts to realize that what's happening in Gaza will undermine some of his grander goals in the region? And I think that is potentially, what could really start to shift his behavior.
Okay. But you do think there's been movement on Iran in particular?
I do. I mean, the United States and Iran have been, at the table for a couple months now. They do seem to be getting hung up on this idea of zero enrichment for Iran. I think there was some question of where Donald Trump stood on this, but unfortunately, in the last few weeks, he does seem to have kind of decided that this is the goal of the talks, is to end Iran's enrichment program. I think it is highly unlikely. I don't want to say impossible, but very close to impossible that Iran will agree to this. So I guess I'm waiting for what I think folks who are kind of watching these negotiations is waiting for is, okay, what kind of language, what sort of workaround, kind of face-saving shenanigans can we come up with to allow Iran to say, okay, we're just going to not enrich, but retain the right to enrich, or just keep enriching, and Donald Trump will just say, okay, they agreed to what I want. And because he said it, like, most Republicans will just be like, oh, okay, good for us, which is the magic of Donald Trump.
It is. Yeah, it's quite the magic to watch. And I guess to shift now, he's also attempting to work that magic on China.
I like the president a lot, President Xi. I don't want it to happen. I was actually saddened to hear it, but they're getting absolutely hammered in China.
The ripple effect from tariffs coming as Americans face stubborn inflation. A new survey finds a quarter of U.S. consumers are now financing their groceries with buy now, pay later options.
I'm not going to say, I'm going to play hardball with China. I'm going to play hardball with you, President Xi. No. We're going to be very nice.
Excuse me? China increased their tariffs on the United States. Trump blinked.
And particularly his imposition of tariffs on China, which he very much appears to have backed down on.
Yeah.
Is that what happened?
I mean, it does. I mean, first he rolled out these massive sanctions on pretty much every country on Earth, including on islands where I don't think there are any people.
Yep.
it was really wild. And then he kind of backed off on those, and he was like, okay, I'll suspend the sanctions on everybody except China. And, of course, very soon, members of the business community and others, not just the business community, really made clear that this was having a very bad impact on the economy. Something that really I paid attention to. And one of the reasons this jumped out at me is because, members of my own family, my mom's family are truck drivers. Her father, her uncles, and just it's kind of something that a lot of members of her family have been involved in, and I grew up with. But because of the tariffs, like the number of containers coming in has been drastically reduced. So these truck drivers are not able to make loads. I mean, they go to the ports and they are leaving the ports with empty trailers, which is something they never want to do because they're not getting paid on the way home. And once I saw that story, this is about a month ago, I was like, okay, this is something that's going to filter up. I mean, because this is, again, a big constituency of Trump's. And yes, of course, lo and behold, I mean, I don't know if it was specifically the truckers or the Teamsters who made this clear to Trump, but I'm sure he and his team are getting messages from these people and from others like them, whether it's farmers, whether it's other kinds of small business people whose livelihoods and whose, kind of small businesses have really been hurt, if not outright destroyed by the massive increase in their expenses. So, referring back to the Trump magic is he can say, well, it was all a negotiating tactic. We're going to talk. We're going to keep talking. But I really got their attention by announcing these tariffs. But yes, it's really unclear what, if anything, he's actually achieved for American workers with this whole big show.
Matt, last time we spoke about this issue, we talked about, I guess, the makeup of the cabinet, the ideological makeup of Trump's cabinet, and how it is staffed by a significant number of China hawks in very high positions. How is, I guess, that power dynamic interacting with what you were talking about just then, pressure from the base on the Trump administration? Does this mean that the China hawks are sort of losing the internal power game?
I don't think so. I mean, we may have talked about this when we last spoke, but even more so now when we are, almost 6 months, just short of 6 months into Trump's presidency, is like how little he's actually talked about China. That is what is striking to me. I mean, because he really, his first administration, they made China the thing. I mean, Obama for, the whole pivot to Asia, they'd wanted to focus on China. But like Trump in his national security strategy, which was written, and the key author of that strategy, Elbridge Colby, who is now, Undersecretary of Defense for Policy, I believe, in the Pentagon. They really made China the key focus of the entire foreign policy establishment. And the Biden administration really picked up the ball and just carried that forward. But Trump has focused on a lot of things that aren't China. Now with these tariffs, he has focused on that. But he really, as far as I've seen, he has not kind of articulated to the extent that Trump ever articulates a grand vision, short of, this is great for me, Donald Trump. He hasn't really come out with, what he feels should be the right approach or the vision of the future U.S.-China relationship, except for the fact that, China's a powerful country, and Russia's a powerful country, and powerful countries get to make the decisions that smaller countries have to just deal with. Now, getting back to your question about, I don't think that the China hawks have lost the debate. I think the China hawks are pretty much dominating the debate. I think there's a debate about, okay, what steps do we take to tee up our approach? But I would say China remains, both in the administration and in Washington in general, the kind of lens, if not obsession, and I would use the word obsession, of a lot of foreign policy folks.
Absolutely. And the same, I think, is true in Australia. What do you think the Chinese government makes of this?
I think they're kind of just waiting and letting Donald Trump kind of waiting to see, because again, he has not offered all that much that is a coherent policy. I mean, he'll make comments about China, then he'll make kind of, make statements of admiration about Xi. I think they are waiting for a big meeting. I think they want to just kind of let Donald Trump do his thing and then get together and hear from him himself, hear from his team himself. But I do like one thing that just came up over these past few days is this whole idea of the Golden Dome. Like the United States is like space missile shield versus, Israel has Iron Dome, but because it's Trump's America, it's golden. It's got to be Golden Dome. It's the most beautiful Golden Dome you've ever seen. But I just want to say, like, having friends, I do have contacts in like this in the Space Force. This is never going to happen. I do think we should just put this out there for listeners. The Golden Dome is never going to happen. It is a figment of Donald Trump's imagination.
Yeah, just like it was a figment of Ronald Reagan's imagination.
Yes, exactly where I was going. Yes, the Star Wars, yes.
The Strategic Defense Initiative has been labeled Star Wars, but it isn't about war. It's about peace. It isn't about retaliation. It's about prevention. It isn't about fear. It's about hope. And in that struggle, if you'll pardon my stealing a film line, the Force is with us.
But that doesn't mean we aren't going to waste an enormous amount of time and money on this freaking thing. And that doesn't mean we aren't going to provoke other powers like China's government, Russia's government, North Korea, who have all responded to this idea, saying this is upsetting a balance of power. I've never thought that a balance of power or a balance of terror when it comes to nuclear weapons was a great state of being, but this is what they are saying. But it's also like, I think the Chinese government is probably smart enough to know that this is all a figment of Trump's imagination, but still it's significant enough for them to respond to.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I think your point about provocations is a really important one, because there are, of course, those big ones going on, but they are sitting above some, I guess, smaller ones, but ones that still really matter because they impact actual people's real lives and relationships. And one of those attacks, this kind of got missed in a lot of the coverage, but one of those attacks is happening through the administration's attack on Harvard University.
Right.
Because one of the justifications for that attack, and we spoke about this on the show last week, was that Harvard was apparently allowing agents of the Chinese Communist Party in through student visa programs. Do you think there is an understanding of the, obviously this is getting a lot of coverage at home because it has a huge impact on the Ivy Leagues in particular, but do you think there is an understanding of the significant international repercussions of these kinds of authoritarian attacks at home?
For Trump, I don't. In Washington, I do. I mean, I think this is one of the things. He's attacked on Harvard in particular, but not only Harvard, on Columbia and some of these other. But Harvard, I mean, is clearly a focus just because, it's Harvard. But I do think it's in the way that he's chosen, okay, he's focusing on China. Here, he's also used the issue of the Palestinian rights encampments as a wedge into, other efforts to, particularly with Columbia, to deny funds from Columbia. And I think it's important to understand, like, this is because he understands these are issues that will divide the opposition, that will divide Democrats, right? He understands that when he focuses on Palestinian protesters, some of whom, let's admit, do say very offensive and sometimes anti-Semitic things, that's something on which Democrats can be divided. When he focuses on China, when he makes these attacks on Harvard, all about you're letting, agents of the Chinese Communist Party, and he understands that there are some, hawkish Democrats who are not going to outright oppose him. And I think that, he and his team see that as a real value here.
When we spoke about this last week on the show, we spoke about the damage that seeking out of political value that Trump has does to the United States relationships with the world, because, so often we think of international relations as kind of high level, Trump meeting Xi, but those relationships between actual human beings do matter. And what these attacks do is significantly undermine them. What do you think is the kind of cumulative impact of all of these attacks, not just on institutions of higher education, but on, on foreign aid, on other scholarship programs? Because it does seem to be building up constantly.
Yeah. Well, there's two. One is just, the exertion of authoritarian power and the establishment of, the ability of a president to act unbound by norms and laws And let's understand, like, his order on Harvard to just look for ways to deny them money is completely illegal. This is money that has been allocated by Congress. There has been no ruling by any court that Harvard University has done really anything wrong. Yet the president, the executive himself, is just saying, nope, going to hold this money. Go find me a reason. It's just so blatantly illegal. So I think that's worth saying. And obviously that has really enormous negative implications for our democracy. If the president can just do this here, he can do that on a whole bunch of things. And Trump has shown that he's willing to do it on a whole bunch of things. Again, part of the problem here is, as we've discovered in the first Trump administration and more so now, is that so much of our system is based on an adherence to norms. Now, one can say that, we sometimes let this adherence to norms kind of hurt our ability to actually make change. I think that was true of the Biden administration.
Yeah.
But when you have a president who is just committed to breaking those norms, what tools do we actually have to push back? It's like, well, we'll file a lawsuit and we'll see how that goes 5 years from now. I mean, that's just not a sufficient check on an executive who is acting in this way. Clearly, the tools that the opposition have in a situation like this are like woefully insufficient. But also in terms of just America's influence, American security and prosperity, what Trump is doing in, essentially making the United States a much, much less hospitable and frankly, outright hostile place for foreign visitors, and particularly for foreign students. It is hard to overstate, I think, the damage this is doing and will do for a generation. Like, listen, even, you get 10 members of the Chinese Communist Party who are coming to college in the United States. One of those people is staying, man. One of those people is going to a rave and they are like, this is awesome. I love this. I love the way I'm living here. Just for an example, but no, the ability to attract this kind of talent from around the world, to engage with students here, to engage with American students, to engage with other students from other places around the world, doesn't just benefit the United States. I would argue it benefits the world.
Absolutely.
And, there's just no recognition of that here. And I think that's sad, but it's also, I think it's going to negatively impact our security and our prosperity.
Yeah. I couldn't agree more. Matt, you mentioned some of the opposition to Trump and what he is doing and how, it is largely fragmented. It's trying to kind of put out spot fires. Do you see the possibility of that changing, of a mobilization of Democrats behind a charismatic leader or something like that? I think there's obviously a hope for that permeates all kinds of coverage. Do you think it's realistic?
I mean, I think there is a possibility of mass mobilization. I mean, we saw this obviously in the first Trump administration, whether it was the women's marches in the days after the inauguration, but also the protests against, the immigration crackdowns. Yeah. It's taken a while for the opposition to kind of start getting its act together in terms of the leadership. I do think the activist base has been, as they always are, very attuned to this stuff, because these are people who work in these communities. They are from and of these communities, and they have been sounding the alarms from day one. Yeah. But I'm sorry to say it, but I do think the Democratic Party is still kind of in shock about the election. They shouldn't be, but I do think the extent to which they have been forced to confront the fact that the Trump movement, the MAGA movement, is a very real thing. It is not an anomaly. It is not something that Vladimir Putin did to America. It is something that is from within, that is part of America, and they haven't quite landed on a coherent or shared theory of how to contest it. So I'm sorry for my friends in Australia and elsewhere that we do not have our shit together.
Well, we've been described by much American media as part of the center of the global revitalization of the left. So that was exciting to learn.
Yes, thank you. Yes, thank you.
little bit skeptical. Yeah. Anyway, Matt, thank you as always so much for your time and generosity when so much is going on. We really appreciate it.
No, it's a great pleasure to talk to you. Thank you.
Thanks, Matt. Thanks so much for joining us today. We'd love to hear from you about the show. Are there particular guests you'd like us to have back? Maybe someone you think we should have on the show. Do you prefer the episodes where we interview someone or the less formal chats between me and one of the team here? You can email us with your thoughts. We're at podcasts@australiainstitute.org.au, or you can hit me up on social media. I'm at Emma Shortis on Blue Sky and Twitter, and at ShortisE on Instagram. This episode was recorded on Wednesday the 28th of May. Some stuff will probably have changed since then. After America is supported by the Andrew Farron Foundation and produced by Angus Blackman. We'll be back next week. I'm Emma Shortis. Thanks for listening.